Take the money and walk away.
I never needed it.
We're losing suppliers. This isn't normal.
No, this doesn't happen to me.
Control isn't always visible, Evelyn.
Sebastian Hale didn't hesitate when he signed the divorce papers and slid them across the polished marble table, his voice calm as he offered Evelyn Hale a $10 million settlement to disappear quietly. In front of his CFO and legal counsel, he called her a liability, someone who had contributed nothing to his billion-dollar empire. Evelyn didn't argue. She didn't cry. She didn't even touch the money. She simply signed her name, stood up, and walked out with nothing. What Sebastian didn't know was that he had just cut himself off from the Rothschild dominion, and the woman he dismissed as powerless had already begun dismantling everything he owned. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. 3 days earlier, the cracks in their marriage had already started to show. The ballroom of the St. Regis shimmered under gold and blue light, reflecting the corporate colors of Hale Dynamics. It was Sebastian's night. 10 years of relentless ambition had turned him into one of the most talked-about names in Silicon Valley, and the room revolved around him like a carefully curated orbit. Investors leaned in when he spoke. Politicians laughed at his jokes. Executives watched his expressions, waiting for approval, and then there was Evelyn. She stood near the far end of the room, just outside the circle of influence, holding a glass of sparkling water. Her charcoal silk dress was simple, almost invisible compared to the glittering gowns around her. No designer logos, no attention drawn. To most of the guests, she looked like a woman who had been left behind. Someone who married the CEO before he became important and never quite caught up. Sebastian barely looked at her, not once during his speech, not when applause filled the room, not even when the board chairman raised a glass in his honor. Charlotte Bennett stepped into that space instead. She moved with confidence, her presence deliberate. Her crimson gown caught the light, her laughter carried across conversations, and when she reached Sebastian, her hand rested naturally on his arm. Too natural. Evelyn noticed the way he leaned closer, the way his expression softened in a way it hadn't for her in years. The shift had been gradual, so gradual she almost convinced herself it wasn't happening. Late nights that turned into overnight trips. Business meetings that didn't require her presence anymore. Conversations that became shorter, colder, more transactional. Now it stood in front of her, undeniable. Charlotte wasn't just part of his company. She was replacing her. She looks like she wandered in by accident, Charlotte said quietly to someone beside her, not even bothering to lower her voice enough. The small group laughed. Evelyn didn't react. She didn't turn. She didn't defend herself. She simply took a slow sip of her drink, her expression calm. A waiter approached her a moment later, hesitating slightly. "Mom, would you like something else?" "I'm fine," Evelyn said gently. He nodded quickly, almost respectfully, before stepping away. It was a small moment, easy to miss, but not entirely ordinary. Across the room, a man in an expensive suit glanced at her, his expression shifting in recognition. He started to move in her direction, then stopped when Charlotte pulled Sebastian further into the crowd. The moment passed. Later that night, the ride home was silent. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows of the car as Sebastian scrolled through his phone, his attention locked on numbers and messages. "Charlotte did an excellent job today," he said without looking up. "The board is impressed." "I'm sure they are," Evelyn replied. He finally glanced at her, irritation flickering across his face. "You didn't even try tonight. You stood there like you didn't belong." Evelyn turned slightly, meeting his gaze. "I spoke with 2 of your investors for nearly half an hour," she said quietly. "You were busy celebrating." Sebastian scoffed. "That's not the point. I need someone who can keep up with me. Someone who understands the level I'm operating at." The words landed harder than he intended, or maybe exactly as hard as he meant them to. Evelyn looked out the window again, her reflection faint against the glass. "The level you're operating at," she repeated softly. He didn't notice the change in her tone, or the stillness that followed. When they reached the house, Sebastian stepped out first, already on another call. He walked ahead without waiting. Evelyn stayed behind for a moment. Her phone vibrated quietly in her hand, a single message. She glanced down. The sender's name wasn't saved, but the message was brief, precise. Board confirmation received. Awaiting your instruction. Evelyn stared at the screen for a second longer than necessary. Then she locked the phone and slipped it back into her bag. Inside the house, Sebastian's voice echoed from his office, sharp and impatient. Evelyn stood alone in the hallway, the silence settling around her. For a long time she had chosen not to act, not to reveal, not to disrupt the life he believed he had built on his own. She had given him that. Because she wanted to believe he would still see her, not her name, not her background, just her. Now, watching him disappear behind a closed door, she realized something simple. He never had. Evelyn walked upstairs slowly, her steps quiet, controlled. In the bedroom, she placed her bag on the dresser and reached inside. The phone vibrated again. Another message. Legal documentation prepared. Blackwood Capital ready to proceed. Her fingers rested lightly on the screen. She didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, she looked at her reflection in the mirror. Calm, composed, unshaken, and completely done waiting. Downstairs, Sebastian's voice grew louder, frustrated over something minor. Upstairs, Evelyn picked up her phone again. This time, she opened the message. Her thumb hovered for just a moment, before she finally began to type. Sebastian used to say he built everything from nothing. He believed it now more than ever. Back when Hale Dynamics was still a fragile idea and not a billion-dollar machine, he had met Evelyn in a quiet coffee shop in Palo Alto. She hadn't asked about projections or funding rounds. She hadn't cared about pitch decks or valuations. She had listened. At the time, that had been enough. They had lived in a small apartment with mismatched furniture and unreliable heating. Sebastian worked endless hours, chasing investors who dismissed him. Evelyn stayed steady, calm, supportive in a way that didn't demand recognition. He remembered the night he almost gave up. A major investor had backed out. Payroll was due. The company had less than a month left. He had come home exhausted, defeated, ready to walk away. Evelyn had made tea and sat across from him without saying much. The next week, a small but critical investment came through. Enough to keep the company alive, enough to buy time. Sebastian had called it luck. He always called it luck. Years later, standing in his glass-walled office overlooking San Francisco, he told the story differently. He talked about instinct, timing, vision, the kind of language that turned struggle into legend. Evelyn rarely corrected him. That morning, she stood by the window while he moved around the office, preparing for another round of meetings. His schedule was packed. Interviews, investor calls, a board briefing. He didn't ask what she had planned. You don't need to come in today, he said casually, adjusting his cufflinks. It's going to be a long one, nothing you'd be interested in. Evelyn turned slightly. The Orion Microsystems vote is today. Sebastian paused. He looked at her, surprised. That's a closed board discussion, he said. How do you even know about that? Evelyn held his gaze for a second too long. I read, she said simply. He let out a short laugh, dismissing it. It's complicated. You wouldn't understand the details. She didn't respond. Because she did understand the details, better than most of the people sitting in that boardroom. Sebastian grabbed his jacket and checked his phone. A message from Charlotte lit up his screen. He smiled without realizing it. Evelyn noticed. You are working late again, she asked. Something like that, he replied, not meeting her eyes. Charlotte and I need to finalize a few things before the vote. Of course, Charlotte again. Evelyn nodded slowly, as if filing the information away instead of reacting to it. Try not to make any irreversible decisions, she said. Sebastian frowned. What does that mean? Just a thought, Evelyn replied. He shook his head, already losing interest in the conversation. Relax, Evelyn. I know what I'm doing. That was the problem. He truly believed that. Later that afternoon, the Hale Dynamics headquarters buzzed with anticipation. The Orion Microsystems acquisition was supposed to be the next major leap forward. Control over their patents would secure Sebastian's position in the market for years. In the executive conference room, Charlotte stood at the head of the table, leading the discussion with precision. She spoke the language Sebastian valued: numbers, projections, aggressive growth. The board listened. They respected her. Sebastian watched with quiet satisfaction. This was what a real partner looked like, he thought. Someone who could match his pace. Someone who belonged in the room, not someone who stood on the sidelines. Everything is aligned, Charlotte said confidently. We're expecting full approval. Sebastian nodded. Let's move forward. The meeting wrapped quickly. Decisions made. Next steps outlined. Clean, efficient, controlled, or at least that's how it felt. Across the city, Evelyn sat alone in a quiet private office she rarely used. It wasn't part of Sebastian's world. He didn't know it existed. The space was minimal, clean, no personal decorations. Just a desk, a secure terminal, and a phone. Her phone vibrated. She didn't rush to answer. When she finally picked it up, the voice on the other end was calm, respectful. Miss Roth's child, the Orion microsystem situation has progressed. We are prepared to act pending your authorization. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. For years she had stayed out of it, kept her distance, allowed Sebastian to build his version of success without interference. But that version had come at a cost, not just to her, to himself. Has the board been notified? She asked. Yes, the voice replied. We've positioned it as a competitive bid, no direct connection to you. Good. She stood slowly, walking toward the window. The city stretched out beneath her, distant and quiet. Proceed, she said. There was a pause on the line. Understood. We'll initiate the acquisition within the hour. Evelyn ended the call without another word. Back at Hale Dynamics, Sebastian leaned back in his chair, satisfied. Everything was falling into place. The deal would close. The company would grow. His future would expand exactly as planned. His phone buzzed, then again and again. He frowned. Picking it up, the first alert hit him like a cold wave. Orion Microsystems stock sudden surge. The second came seconds later. A major stake acquired by private entity. His expression tightened. What the hell is this, he muttered. Charlotte stepped closer, her confidence flickering. Let me see. The third alert came in. Control threshold exceeded, voting majority secured. Sebastian's grip on the phone tightened. This is impossible, he said under his breath. No one moves this fast without. He stopped, because a fourth notification appeared. Parent entity disclosed, Rothschild Dominion. The room went quiet. Charlotte looked at him, confused. Do you know who that is? Sebastian stared at the screen. The name felt familiar, distant, like something he had heard once and never needed to understand. No, he said slowly. But for the first time in a long time, uncertainty crept into his voice. And somewhere across the city, Evelyn's phone lit up again. Acquisition complete. The room didn't recover after the name appeared on the screen, Rothschild Dominion. It hung in the air like something no one wanted to say out loud. Sebastian straightened slowly, forcing his voice back into control. It's just a competitor, he said. More to himself than to anyone else. Someone making a move. We've seen aggressive bids before. Charlotte didn't answer right away. Her eyes were still fixed on the data. This isn't aggressive, she said quietly. This is calculated. Sebastian ignored the shift in her tone. He walked toward the head of the table, reclaiming his position, his authority. Call legal, he ordered. I want to know who's behind the holding entity. Luxembourg registrations don't stay anonymous forever. They used layered ownership, Charlotte replied. 3 shells deep. We won't get a clear answer today. Sebastian's jaw tightened. Then push the board, he snapped. We still have influence. We can block. We don't have the votes anymore, Charlotte cut in. Silence that hit harder than the name. Sebastian turned to her sharply. What do you mean we don't have the votes? They secured 62%, she said, her voice steady but lower now. It's already done. Even if we challenge it, the timeline favors them. By the time anything goes to court, control will be fully transferred. Sebastian stared at her. That's not possible, he said again. But the certainty was gone, because deep down he knew it was. The precision, the timing, the speed. This wasn't luck. This was someone who understood the system better than he did. Marcus Ellington stepped into the room, his usually composed expression unsettled. He held a tablet in his hand, but he wasn't looking at it. Nathaniel, he stopped himself, correcting automatically. Sebastian, we have another issue. Sebastian turned, irritation flashing. Now what? Marcus hesitated for a fraction of a second. Our suppliers in Taiwan and Singapore just requested renegotiations, immediate. Charlotte's head snapped up. On what grounds, they didn't say. Just that their contracts no longer align with their strategic priorities. Sebastian let out a short, disbelieving laugh. That's not how this works. We have binding agreements. They're offering to pay the termination penalties, Marcus said. That shut the room down again. Paying penalties meant one thing. They didn't care about losing the contracts. which meant someone else was more valuable. Sebastian felt something shift inside his chest. Not panic, not yet, but something close. "Who's pulling them?" he asked. Marcus didn't answer immediately. He turned the tablet around and placed it on the table. "Same parent network," he said. "Rothschild Dominion." Again, Charlotte exhaled slowly, her earlier confidence fading into calculation. "This isn't about Orion," she said. "This is coordinated." Sebastian's mind raced. Supply chains, hardware dependencies, manufacturing, everything connected, everything vulnerable. "Why?" he demanded. "Why target us?" No one had an answer because none of them understood the real connection. Across the city, Evelyn stood in the same quiet office, her posture unchanged. Another update came through. Secondary suppliers responding as projected. Contract exits in progress. She read it once, then again. No emotion crossed her face. Not satisfaction, not anger, just acknowledgement. For years she had watched Sebastian build something he believed was entirely his. She had let him take ownership of decisions, of risks, of success. Or she had never corrected him. Because she wanted him to believe in himself. Now she was watching what happened when that belief turned into arrogance. Her phone vibrated again. A different number this time, she answered. "Miss Rothschild," the voice said, respectful, careful. "We've received inquiries from Hale Dynamics' legal team. They're trying to trace the acquisition." "Let them," Evelyn said. "Calm. They may escalate." "They will," she replied. "That's expected." There was a pause on the line. "Do you want us to delay further actions until—" "No," Evelyn interrupted softly. "We proceed as planned." She ended the call before the man could respond. For a moment she stood still. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a thin folder. Inside were documents she had kept untouched for years. Original agreements, early-stage contracts, signatures that had never been questioned, not by Sebastian, not by anyone. Her name wasn't on them in any obvious way, but her control was. She closed the folder carefully. Not yet. Back at Hale Dynamics, the atmosphere had shifted completely. The confidence from earlier was gone. Phones rang non-stop. Assistants moved quickly, voices hushed but urgent. Screens updated in real time with numbers no one wanted to see. Sebastian stood in his office, staring out at the skyline. It looked the same, but something underneath had changed. Charlotte stepped in without knocking. "We need to stabilize messaging," she said. "If leaks, investors will panic." "They're already panicking," Sebastian replied. "Then we get ahead of it," she pushed. "We frame it as a strategic pivot. We announce a new partnership. Something to buy time with what?" He snapped. "Our main acquisition just got taken out from under us, and our suppliers are walking." Charlotte didn't flinch. "We still have leverage," she said. "Your reputation, your network, people still believe in you." Sebastian turned to her slowly. "Do they?" he asked. For the first time there was doubt in his voice. Charlotte held his gaze. "They believe in what you've built." He let out a quiet breath. What he had built. That was the story. That was always the story. Marcus appeared at the door again, this time without hesitation. "Sebastian," he said, his tone tighter than before. "There's something else." Sebastian didn't turn. "What now?" Marcus stepped forward, placing a printed document on the desk. "It's from one of our early investors," he said. "They're asking for clarification on a clause tied to the original seed funding." Sebastian frowned, finally looking over. "What clause?" Marcus hesitated. "The one tied to the core algorithm patents." Sebastian picked up the document, scanning it quickly. The language was dense, legal, old. He barely remembered signing it, back when survival mattered more than details. "What about it?" he said impatiently. Marcus swallowed. "They're questioning whether we actually own the underlying IP, or if we've just been licensing it this whole time." The room went still. Charlotte stepped closer. "That doesn't make sense," she said. "We built that system." Marcus didn't look convinced. Sebastian's grip tightened on the paper. "This is nothing," he said, though his voice lacked its usual certainty. "Some outdated clause. We'll have legal shut it down." But even as he said it, something in the back of his mind stirred. A memory, a contract he hadn't fully read. A moment he had rushed through, because he thought it didn't matter. Across the city, Evelyn's phone lit up one more time. She glanced at the message. Blackwood Capital requesting confirmation to review original patent structure. Evelyn looked down at the screen for a long second. Then, without hesitation, she replied, "Approved." The tension didn't settle after the alerts, it spread. By the time the market opened the next morning, the ripple had turned into a pattern no one inside Hale Dynamics could ignore. Sebastian walked into the executive floor and felt it immediately. Conversation stopped when he passed. Screens were turned slightly away. Voices dropped just enough to make it obvious. Something was wrong, not just a deal falling through, something deeper. Marcus was already waiting in the conference room, along with 2 senior analysts and Charlotte. A series of photographs filled the main display, all trending in directions Sebastian didn't like. He didn't sit. Explain it, he said. Marcus stepped forward, tapping the screen. It's not just Orion Microsystems. Since yesterday afternoon, we've received notices from 3 additional vendors. Which vendors? Primary hardware logistics in Rotterdam, secondary server distributors in Singapore, and one of our mineral suppliers in South America. Sebastian stared at him. All of them? Marcus nodded once. All of them. Charlotte crossed her arms, thinking fast. What are they asking for? They're not asking, Marcus replied. They're exiting. Sebastian's hardened. They can't just exit. We have multi-year agreements. They're invoking penalty clauses, Marcus said. They're willing to pay to get out. Again, that same pattern. Sebastian stepped closer to the screen, scanning the details himself. Dates, contract ID, notices. Everything was clean, legal, deliberate. Who's backing them, he asked. Hesitated. Sebastian turned sharply. Marcus, they're all tied, Marcus said finally. Different subsidiaries, different regions, but same umbrella structure. Sebastian didn't need him to say it. Rothschild Dominion. The name didn't feel distant anymore. It felt close, too close. Charlotte moved to the table, pulling up additional data. If this continues, she said, we'll have bottlenecks across production within weeks. We can find new suppliers, Sebastian snapped. Not at this scale, she replied immediately, and not this fast. He turned to her, frustration rising. Then we pay more, or we outbid whoever's behind this. Charlotte shook her head. It's not about price. That stopped him, because she was right. This wasn't a negotiation. This was pressure. Targeted, precise. Someone wasn't trying to compete with Hale Dynamics. They were trying to corner it. Sebastian walked out of the room before anyone could say anything else. He needed space to think, but the silence in his office wasn't better. It was worse. He stood behind his desk, staring at the skyline again, but it didn't bring clarity this time. It only reflected how quickly things were shifting out of his control. His phone buzzed. Another message, investor inquiry, then another. Request for clarification, then a third. Concern over supply chain stability. He dropped the phone onto the desk. For the first time in years, he didn't have an immediate answer. Across the city, Evelyn sat in the same quiet office, her posture unchanged, her expression steady. The reports were coming in faster now, each one confirming what she already knew. The system was responding exactly as expected. European Logistics Division fully transitioned, one message read. Pacific routes adjusting to new priority channels, said another. She didn't rush through them. She read each one carefully. Not because she doubted the outcome, but because she understood the weight behind every shift. These weren't just numbers. They were decisions affecting thousands of people, companies, employees, entire networks. She had spent years avoiding this level of intervention, because once she stepped in, there was no partial control, it was absolute. Her phone rang again. This time, the number was familiar, she answered. Miss Rothschild, the voice said. Blackwood Capital has completed the preliminary review. Evelyn leaned slightly against the desk. And? There's confirmation, the man replied. The original patent structure is intact. Hale Dynamics never owned the core IP outright. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, not from surprise, from acknowledgement. Continue, she said. The licensing agreement is still valid, he added, but the trigger conditions exist. If certain financial or legal thresholds are met, the control reverts. Evelyn's fingers rested lightly on the edge of the desk. How close are we? She asked. There was a pause. Closer than they realize. She ended the call. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then she walked toward the window again, looking out over the city. Somewhere inside it, Sebastian was still trying to solve a problem he didn't understand, and she was the missing piece he refused to see. Back at Hale Dynamics, Charlotte stepped into Sebastian's office without waiting. We need to talk, she said. He didn't turn, then talk. She walked closer, her heels sharp against the floor. This isn't random. Someone is targeting us. I know that, he said flatly. No, you don't, she pushed. You're treating this like a market play. It's not. It's strategic isolation. Sebastian turned slowly, And you know that how? Because every move lines up with our dependencies, she said. Not our strengths, our weaknesses. That hit. Because it was true. Too true. These aren't guesses, she continued. Whoever is doing this knows exactly how Hale Dynamics is built. Sebastian's expression hardened. Plenty of people know how this company is built. Not like this, Charlotte said. Silence stretched between them. Then she added, quieter now. This feels internal. Sebastian stared at her. You're saying someone inside the company is feeding information? I'm saying someone understands you better than you think, she replied. That line lingered longer than it should have. Because for a second, Evelyn crossed his mind. Not as a suspect, that would have been absurd, but as something else. A memory, a presence, someone who had been there from the beginning. He dismissed it immediately. That's not possible, he said. Charlotte didn't argue, but she didn't look convinced either. Then find another explanation, she said. Before he could respond, his desk phone rang, not his mobile, the direct line. He frowned and picked it up. Sebastian Hale. A calm, unfamiliar voice answered. This is Edward Blackwood, calling on behalf of Blackwood Capital. We need to discuss a matter regarding your company's foundational intellectual property. Sebastian's grip tightened. I'm in the middle of something, he said. Have your people contact my legal team. I'm afraid this requires your attention directly, the voice replied, steady and unyielding. It concerns a contractual clause you signed 10 years ago. Sebastian felt something cold settle in his chest. I don't recall you will, Edward Blackwood said quietly. Once you review the document, the line went silent. Sebastian lowered the phone slowly. Charlotte watched him. What is it? She asked. Sebastian didn't answer immediately. He looked down at the receiver in his hand. Then at the stack of documents Marcus had brought earlier, the old contract, the one he barely remembered signing, the one tied to the beginning. His voice was quieter now. Get legal, he said. Charlotte didn't move. Because for the first time since she had met him, Sebastian Hale didn't sound certain. Sebastian didn't sleep that night. The contract sat open on his desk, printed, highlighted, marked in places his legal team had already flagged as unclear, outdated, or non-threatening. None of those labels felt accurate anymore. By morning, the conference room was filled. Lawyers, advisors, senior executives. The energy was different now. No one leaned back in their chairs. No one interrupted casually. Everyone was listening. Richard Langford stood at the front, glasses low on his nose, flipping through the same document Sebastian had been staring at for hours. This clause, Langford said, tapping a section with his pen, was part of the original seed agreement. It's structured as a convertible instrument tied to intellectual property rights. Sebastian crossed his arms. In plain English, Langford exhaled slowly. In plain English, the investor who provided that early funding didn't just buy equity. They secured conditional ownership over the foundational patents. That's not possible, Sebastian said immediately. We built everything in-house. Langford didn't argue. He simply slid another page forward. You built on top of it, he said. But the base layer, the original algorithm framework, was tied to that funding. Charlotte leaned in, scanning the document. So what does that actually mean? Langford didn't hesitate this time. It means if the trigger conditions are activated, control of the underlying IP can legally revert to the original funding entity. Silence spread across the room. Sebastian felt it again, that cold, creeping conditions, he asked. Langford adjusted his glasses. There are several. Bankruptcy filings, severe financial distress, or he paused slightly, material damage to company value caused by executive decisions. Charlotte looked up sharply. That's vague. It's intentionally broad, Langford replied. It gives the investor flexibility. Sebastian's jaw tightened. And you're telling me this is enforceable? Langford didn't answer immediately. Then carefully, if challenged, it would depend on the jurisdiction and interpretation. But yes, it's not something we can dismiss outright. Marcus shifted in his seat. Langford flipped back to the first page, a shell entity at the time, Apex Capital Holdings. The name landed quietly, but it didn't feel quiet. Sebastian stared at it. Apex Capital, he remembered the name barely, back when he had been desperate enough to accept anything that kept the company alive. They were small, he said, barely a presence. Langford nodded. At the time, Charlotte's voice was tight. And now? Langford looked at her directly. They're not small anymore. No one needed him to say the rest. Sebastian leaned forward, his hands flat against the table. "So, what are they doing?" he asked. "Are they challenging ownership?" Langford closed the folder slowly. "We don't know yet," he said, "but the call you received from Edward Blackwood suggests they're reviewing their position." Sebastian let out a short, humorless breath. "Reviewing," he repeated, "after 10 years. Because something triggered their attention," Charlotte said quietly. Sebastian didn't respond, because he already knew what that something was: the instability, the supplier exits, the failed acquisition, the cracks. For the first time, he saw how those cracks might look from the outside. Not like temporary setbacks, but like weakness. And weakness invited action. Across the city, Evelyn stood in a different room now, not the quiet office. A larger space. Clean, private, designed for meetings that didn't need to be recorded. Edward Blackwood stood across from her, composed as always, a thin folder in his hands. "We've completed the legal review," he said. Evelyn nodded once. "And?" "The structure is intact," he replied. "There are no gaps. The trigger conditions are valid, and the documentation supports enforcement." Evelyn walked slowly to the table, resting her fingertips against the edge. "And the timing optimal," Edward said. "Given their current exposure, any action now would be difficult for them to counter without significant legal delay." She considered that, not from a place of urgency, but from a place of precision. "Delay benefits them," she said. "Yes," Edward agreed. "Time would allow them to stabilize, to renegotiate supply chains, to rebuild confidence." Evelyn looked down at the folder. For years, this had existed in the background, silent, unchallenged, a safeguard she had never intended to use until now. "What happens if we proceed?" she asked. Edward didn't soften his answer. "They lose control," he said, "not immediately, but structurally. The foundation shifts beneath them." Evelyn closed her eyes for a brief second, not hesitation, recognition. This wasn't just business. This was consequence. She opened her eyes again, steady. "Prepare the notice," she said. Edward inclined his head. Understood. Back at Hale Dynamics, the atmosphere had shifted again. Not panic, something worse. Uncertainty. Sebastian stood in his office, staring at the skyline, the same view that had always made him feel untouchable. It didn't feel that way anymore. Charlotte entered quietly this time. "They're digging," she said. Sebastian didn't turn. "Who is?" "Apex Capital. Blackwood Capital, whoever's behind them," she replied. "They've requested documentation from multiple departments." Indirectly, Sebastian finally faced her. "They don't have authority to request anything." "They're not requesting," she said. "They're verifying." That word settled differently. Verification meant they already suspected something, or knew. Sebastian walked back to his desk, picking up the contract again. "This is leverage," he said. "Nothing more. They're trying to pressure us." Charlotte didn't argue. But she didn't agree either. "What if it's not pressure?" she asked. He looked at her. "What if it's preparation?" The silence that followed stretched longer than either of them expected, because that possibility felt real. Sebastian set the contract down slowly. "Then we respond first," he said. Charlotte's eyes narrowed slightly. "How?" "We control the narrative," he replied. "We move forward with the divorce. Clean separation, no distractions, no vulnerabilities." Charlotte watched him carefully. "You think this is connected to Evelyn?" Sebastian shook his head immediately. "No," he said. "She doesn't have that kind of reach." He said it without hesitation, without doubt, because that version of Evelyn was the only one he allowed himself to believe in. Charlotte studied him for a moment longer, then nodded. "Fine," she said. "Then let's finalize it." Sebastian picked up his phone. "Call Langford," he said. "I want the papers ready by tomorrow." Charlotte turned to leave, but paused at the door. "One more thing," she added. Sebastian looked up. "We received a notice this morning," she said. "Private counsel." Sebastian frowned. "She hired a lawyer?" Charlotte's expression didn't change. "Not just any lawyer," she said. "Edward Blackwood." The name hit harder this time, because now it wasn't distant anymore. It was connected directly. Sebastian's grip tightened around the phone. "That's not a coincidence," Charlotte said quietly. No, it wasn't, and for the first time Sebastian began to wonder if he had already lost control long, before he realized there was a game being played. The conference room felt colder than it should have, not because of the air conditioning, but because something fundamental had shifted, and no one in the room could fully name it yet. Sebastian sat at the head of the table, fingers steepled, watching the door. When it opened, Edward Blackwood didn't rush. He walked in with quiet precision, as if the room already belonged to him. No briefcase, no stack of files. Just a slim leather folder and a presence that didn't need to announce itself. Richard Langford stood automatically, a reflex born from years of recognizing power before it spoke. "Mr. Blackwood," Langford said carefully. Edward inclined his head, polite but distant. "Mr. Langford." His gaze shifted once, briefly, to Sebastian. No hostility, no curiosignition, and then it moved on. Evelyn stepped in behind him. She didn't look different. Same understated clothes, same calm posture. But something about the way she held herself now made the room feel smaller. Charlotte noticed it first. Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if trying to reconcile two versions of the same woman. Evelyn didn't acknowledge her. She took her seat across from Sebastian without asking. Edward remained standing for a moment, then sat beside her, placing the leather folder on the table. Sebastian forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "So," he said, leaning back slightly. "You hired private counsel." Evelyn met his gaze. "I hired someone who understands the terms," she said. Her voice was steady, too steady. Sebastian's smile thinned. "You're about to walk away from $10 million. I hope he explained that part clearly. Edward spoke before Evelyn could respond. "My client is fully aware of the terms," he said. His tone wasn't defensive. It was final. Charlotte leaned forward, unable to hide the edge in her voice. "Then maybe you can explain something to all of us." Edward turned his head slightly. "Of course. Why?" Charlotte asked. "Why would anyone walk away from that kind of settlement?" The question lingered. Evelyn didn't answer. Edward did. "Because the settlement is irrelevant," he said simply. Silence. Sebastian let out a short laugh. "Irrelevant? $10 billion is irrelevant?" Edward didn't look at him. "To my client," he said. "Yes." The air shifted again. Not dramatic, subtle, but undeniable. Sebastian leaned forward now, irritation rising beneath the surface. "You're playing a dangerous game," he said. "If Shiva refuses the settlement, she leaves with nothing." Evelyn didn't flinch. "I'm not leaving with nothing," she said. Charlotte scoffed. "Then what exactly are you leaving with?" Evelyn's eyes moved to her, calm, unbothered. "Exactly what I brought into this marriage," she said. Charlotte opened her mouth, ready to dismiss it, but something in Evelyn's tone made her hesitate. Because it didn't sound like pride, it sounded like fact. Richard Langford cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the room. "Let's stay focused," he said. "We have revised terms. If both parties agree, we can finalize today." Edward nodded once. "We're ready." Langford pushed the documents forward. Standard dissolution. No alimony, no asset division, no claims on Hale Dynamics or any affiliated entities. Sebastian signed without reading. Fast, clean, certain. He had already won this. That's what he believed. He slid the pen across the table. Evelyn didn't pick it up immediately. For a moment, she just looked at the documents. Not with hesitation, with clarity, Edward handed her a pen, different from Sebastian's. Simple, unbranded. Evelyn took it and signed. Not Evelyn Hale, Evelyn Rothschild. The name sat there on the page. Quiet but heavy. Sebastian didn't notice. He was already leaning back, already checking his phone, already moving on. Charlotte saw it. Her eyes flicked down to the signature, then back up. A flicker of confusion crossed her face, but it passed quickly. Because it didn't make sense. Not yet. Edward gathered the documents with deliberate care, sliding them back into his folder. "It's done," he said. No one argued, because it was. Evelyn stood. She didn't rush, didn't linger. She simply adjusted her sleeve and turned toward the door. Sebastian didn't look up. "Good luck," he said casually, still scrolling through his screen. "You're going to need it." Evelyn paused, not because of the words, but because of the assumption behind them. She turned slightly, just enough to look back at him. There was no anger in her expression, no sadness, just distance. "I'll be fine," she said, and then she walked out. Edward followed without another word. The door closed softly behind them. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Sebastian exhaled, leaning back fully in his chair. "That was easier than expected," he said. Charlotte didn't respond immediately. Her eyes were still on the table, on the place where the papers had been. "Did you see that?" Sebastian glanced up. "See what?" "The signature," she said. He frowned slightly. "What about it?" Charlotte hesitated, then shook her head. "Nothing," she said, because saying it out loud would have sounded ridiculous. Outside, in the quiet hallway, Edward walked beside Evelyn without speaking. They moved past reception, past glass walls, past people who didn't look twice, until they reached the elevator. Only then did Edward speak. "The notice will be delivered within the hour," he said. Evelyn nodded. "Good." The elevator doors opened. They stepped inside. As the doors closed, Edward added, "Once it's filed, there's no reversal." Evelyn didn't hesitate. There doesn't need to be. The elevator began its descent. Back upstairs, Sebastian's phone buzzed. Once. Twice. Then continue at the screen. "Marcus," he answered with irritation. "What is it?" Marcus didn't waste time. "They've pulled out," he said. Sebastian's irritation sharpened. "Who?" "Orion Microsystems," Marcus replied. "The deal's dead. They accepted a higher bid, 40% over ours." Sebastian stood up instantly. "That's not possible. We had controlling interest." "Not anymore," Marcus said. There was a pause. Then, quieter, the acquiring entity just filed the paperwork. Sebastian's grip tightened around the phone. "Who?" he demanded. Marcus didn't answer right away, and in that silence, something cold began to settle in Sebastian's chest. Finally, Marcus spoke. "It's routed through a Luxembourg holding company," he said. "But the parent organization is listed as Rothschild Dominion." The name hit harder than it should have, because it shouldn't have meant anything, and yet Sebastian's eyes drifted, almost involuntarily, to the empty doorway Evelyn had just walked through. For the first time, the pieces didn't feel separate anymore. Sebastian didn't sleep that night, not because he was afraid, because he was irritated. Deals collapsed all the time. Competitors overpaid, markets shifted. That was business. It didn't mean anything. It certainly didn't mean he was losing control. That was the narrative he repeated to himself as he stood in his glass office, staring out at the city. Below him, everything still looked the same. Traffic moved. Lights flickered. The skyline didn't care that Orion Microsystems had slipped through his fingers. But his phone did. It hadn't stopped vibrating since Marcus's call. Emails, alerts, analyst inquiries. He ignored most of them, until one subject line made him pause. Supply contract at termination. So he opened it, then another and another. 3 major suppliers, all within the same hour. Each message was polite, professional, legally precise. Each one invoked a clause Sebastian barely remembered existed. Termination with penalty, immediate effect. He felt something cold settle deeper in his chest. This wasn't random. Marcus burst into the office without knocking. His tie was loose, his usual composure gone. "We have a problem," he said unnecessarily. Sebastian turned slowly. "I'm aware." "No," Marcus said, shaking his head. "You're not." He dropped a folder onto the desk. 3 of our core suppliers in Asia just terminated contracts. All of them paid penalties up front. Sebastian frowned. "That doesn't make sense. They lose money doing that. They don't care," Marcus replied. "They're walking away anyway. Why?" Marcus hesitated. That hesitation said more than the answer. "Because they can," he said finally. Sebastian's jaw tightened. "That's not an answer. It is when someone else is covering the cost," Marcus said. Silence. Sebastian's mind moved quickly now. "Who?" he asked. Marcus exhaled slowly. "We traced the transactions," he said. "The penalties weren't paid directly by the suppliers. They were reimbursed through a parent structure." Sebastian felt it again. That same cold weight. "Which parent structure?" he asked. Quieter this time. Marcus met his eyes. Rothschild Dominion. The name landed harder now, not just a coincidence, a pattern. Sebastian turned away, walking toward the window. "That's not possible," he said. Marcus didn't respond, because it was. Sebastian pressed his hand against the glass. He replayed the past 48 hours in his head. The divorce, the signature. Evelyn walking out, and now Orion gone, suppliers gone. Everything connected by the same name. Rothschild. He turned back sharply. "Dig deeper," he said. "I want every connection mapped. Or every subsidiary, every shell company." "We're already doing that," Marcus said. "But it's not simple. Their structure is layered. Offshore entities, private holdings, I don't care." Sebastian cut in. "Find the leverage point." Marcus didn't move. "There's something else," he said. Sebastian exhaled slowly. "What now?" Marcus hesitated again, then pulled out his tablet and turned it toward him. A filing, fresh, time-stamped less than an hour ago. Sebastian scanned it quickly. Acquisition confirmation, majority stake, Orion Microsystems, acquired by a Luxembourg holding group. Parent organization Dominion. His grip tightened. "They didn't just outbid us," Marcus said quietly. "They locked us out completely. 62% voting control, board seats already reassigned." Sebastian's mind raced. Orion wasn't just another deal. It was critical. Without it, their next-generation platform stalled. Without it, their competitive edge weakened. Without it, they became vulnerable. "This is targeted," he said. Marcus didn't disagree. "It looks like it," he said. Sebastian turned back to the window again. For the first time, the city below didn't feel like something he owned. It felt distant. Uneachable. Why? He asked, almost to himself. Marcus didn't answer, because there was no obvious reason. Not yet. Across the world, in a quiet office overlooking Lake Geneva, Evelyn Rothschild sat at a long wooden table. No marble, no glass walls, just stillness. Edward Blackwood stood across from her, reviewing a set of documents. "The acquisition is complete," he said. "Orion is secured." Evelyn nodded once. "They've initiated contract exits," Edward replied, "all within legal boundaries. No exposure." Evelyn leaned back slightly, her expression unchanged. "Good." Edward studied her for a moment. "You're moving faster than expected," he said. Evelyn's gaze shifted to the window. Snow rested quietly along the distant mountains. "I gave him 10 years, she said. Edward didn't respond, because that wasn't just a statement, it was context. She reached for a file and opened it. Inside, layered reports, supply chains, logistics maps, dependency structures. Hale Dynamics wasn't just a software company, it was a network, and she had spent a decade learning every connection. "Phase 1 is complete," Edward said. Evelyn nodded. "Then we move to Phase 2, she said. Edward closed the folder in his hands. "Full isolation?" he asked. Evelyn didn't hesitate. "Yes." Back in California, Charlotte stood in the executive lounge watching Sebastian through the glass. He hadn't noticed her. He rarely did when he was thinking. She studied his posture, the tension in his shoulders, the way he paced. Something was wrong, and she didn't like not knowing what. She stepped inside. "What's going on?" she asked. Sebastian didn't look at her immediately. "Nothing we can't handle," he said. Charlotte crossed her arms. "That's not an answer," he turned finally. "We lost Orion," he said. Her expression tightened. "How? Outbid," he replied. "By who?" Sebastian hesitated, just for a second, then said it. Rothschild Dominion. Charlotte blinked. The name didn't fit. It wasn't part of their usual competition. It wasn't even in their sector. "Why would they care about microchip logistics?" she asked. "That's what I'm trying to figure out," Sebastian said. Charlotte's mind moved quickly. Deals didn't collapse like this without reason. Suppliers didn't walk away unless something bigger pulled them. And now the same name appeared everywhere. Rothschild. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Have you heard that name before?" she asked. Sebastian shook his head. "No," he said, but even as he said it, his mind flickered. A memory. Not clear, not formed, just a fragment. A signature on a piece of paper. Charlotte watched him carefully. "You're missing something," she said. Sebastian didn't respond, because for the first time he felt it too. Not just pressure, not just competition, but something deeper, something deliberate. His phone buzzed again, another alert. He looked down and froze. Marcus, another message. Subject line, urgent, board request. Sebastian opened it, read it once, then again. His expression changed. "What is it?" Charlotte asked. He looked up slowly. "They're calling an emergency board meeting," he said. Charlotte frowned. "That's normal under pressure." Sebastian shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "They're requesting external oversight." The room went still, because that meant one thing. They didn't trust him anymore. And as Sebastian stood there, staring at the message, he realized something far worse. He wasn't just losing control of his company. He was losing control of the narrative, and somewhere someone else was already writing the ending. The ballroom of the Pierre Hotel didn't quiet all at once. It shifted, like a ripple moving across water. Conversation softened. Heads turned. Glasses paused mid-air. Sebastian noticed it immediately, not because he was looking for it, because in rooms like this, he was used to being the center of gravity. Tonight, that gravity had moved. He followed the direction of the crowd's attention and saw her. At the top of the staircase, Evelyn. For a second, his mind rejected it. The woman standing there didn't match Domtijan he'd carried for years. She wasn't the quiet figure in the background. She wasn't the woman who stood by walls unnoticed. She stood still, but the room moved around her. People made space without being asked. Executives he had spent months trying to impress were already turning toward her. Waiting, Charlotte stepped closer to him, her voice low. "Is that?" Sebastian didn't answer. He was still staring. Evelyn descended slowly, not performing, not rushing, just moving with a kind of certainty that didn't need attention, and yet it pulled all of it. By the time she reached the floor, she wasn't alone. To her left, a senior partner from one of the largest private equity firms in the room leaned in, speaking to her with open respect. To her right, a logistics magnate Sebastian had tried to secure for a joint venture months ago was smiling genuinely. Not politely, not strategically, genuinely. Something inside Sebastian tightened. That doesn't make sense, Charlotte murmured. No, it didn't. Sebastian moved before he fully decided to. He crossed the room, ignoring the subtle shifts in conversation, the looks, the unspoken tension. He stopped in front of her. Evelyn, no surprise, no hesitation, just recognition. The same way she might acknowledge a stranger who said her name correctly. Sebastian, she said. Her voice hadn't changed, but everything else had. What are you doing here? He asked. It came out sharper than he intended. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. Attending, she said. That's not what I meant, I know. The calm in her tone made something in him flare. This is a closed summit, he said. You don't just walk in here. A faint pause. Not defensive, measured. I didn't walk in, she said. I was invited. Charlotte stepped in beside him now, her eyes scanning the people around Evelyn. Invited by who, she asked. Evelyn's gaze moved to her briefly, then back to Sebastian. My family's foundation, she said. The words landed, but did not fully. Sebastian frowned. You're what? Evelyn didn't repeat herself. Instead, someone behind her spoke. You must be Sebastian Hale. The voice carried weight. Sebastian turned, a man he recognized instantly. Not from personal meetings, from headlines, from private briefings, from the kind of circles you didn't enter without invitation. Yes, Sebastian said, straightening slightly. And you are Daniel Weiss, the man said, offering a hand. Sebastian shook it automatically. Weiss's grip was firm, controlled. But his attention had already shifted back to Evelyn. Evelyn was just explaining your company's expansion strategy, Weiss said. Sebastian blinked. She was what? Weiss smiled faintly. She has a remarkable grasp of your infrastructure dependencies. Sebastian's gaze snapped back to Evelyn. She didn't react, didn't correct, didn't explain. Charlotte spoke before he could. That's interesting, she said, her tone edged. Considering she's never been involved in operations, Weiss looked at her, then back at Evelyn, and something in his expression changed, subtle, but unmistakable. Is that what you believe? He asked. Charlotte didn't answer, because suddenly she wasn't sure. Sebastian felt it now. That same disconnect between what he knew and what he was seeing. You've been talking about my company, he said, his voice lower now. Evelyn met his eyes. I've been observing your company for years, she said. The words weren't aggressive, but that they weren't soft either. They were precise. And you think you understand it? Charlotte pressed. Evelyn didn't look at her this time. I understand it well enough, she said. A beat. Then, quieter, better than you think. The space between them tightened. Sebastian exhaled slowly. This isn't a game, Evelyn, he said. You don't get to show up here and pretend you belong in this room. The words hung there, sharp, public. For a moment, the surrounding conversations dimmed again. People were listening, or watching. Evelyn didn't react immediately. She let the silence sit, then she spoke. I'm not pretending, she said. The simplicity of it hit harder than anything louder would have. Weiss shifted slightly, stepping back. Not distancing, making space. For her. For what exactly? Sebastian asked. Evelyn glanced toward the stage, a subtle signal. At the same moment, the host's voice rose through the room. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention. The crowd turned. Lights softened. Focus shifted. Evelyn stepped away from Sebastian, not abruptly, not dramatically, just forward. The room parted again. This time, there was no hesitation, no confusion, only expectation. Charlotte grabbed Sebastian's arm lightly. What is this? He didn't answer, because he didn't know. Evelyn reached the front. The host greeted her with visible respect, too much respect, far more than made sense. And now the host said, his voice carrying easily across the room, It is my honor to introduce someone whose organization has quietly reshaped global infrastructure over the past decade. Sebastian felt something drop in his chest, slow, heavy, and who is now stepping forward publicly for the first time. Evelyn didn't look back. She didn't need to. Please welcome, the host continued, Miss Evelyn Rothschild. The name echoed, not loudly, but deeply around the room. Recognition spread. Not confusion, recognition. People reacted, not surprised, but confirmed. Sebastian didn't move, didn't breathe. Rothschild, the same name. The filings, the contracts, the collapse, all of it snapped into alignment. Charlotte's grip tightened on his arm. Sebastian, he barely heard her. Because on stage, Evelyn had already taken the microphone, and for the first time he understood. Not everything. But enough. Enough to know he had never been in control at all. The silence after her name lingered longer than it should have. Not because people didn't understand, because they understood too quickly. Sebastian stood frozen as the realization spread through the room like something irreversible. Conversations shifted tone. Faces that had been politely engaged moments ago were now alert, calculating, attentive, but not to him, to her. Evelyn held the microphone with quiet control. She didn't rush to speak. She let the weight of the name settle first. Rothschild. It wasn't just a surname. It was infrastructure, capital, leverage. It was the kind of influence that didn't need to announce itself, and now it didn't have to hide. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice calm, steady, completely unshaken. "For those of you who have worked with our organization, you already know what we prioritize: long-term stability over short-term gain, quiet ownership over loud speculation." She paused, her gaze moving across the room, never lingering too long, but seeing everything. Sebastian felt that gaze pass over him, not stop. Pass. "I wasn't planning to step forward publicly," she continued, "but recent developments have made it necessary." A few heads turned instinctively toward Sebastian. He felt it, the shift subtle but undeniable. Charlotte's grip on his arm tightened again. "What is she talking about?" she whispered. He didn't answer. Because now he was listening. Evelyn's voice remained even. "Over the past few weeks, several key infrastructure agreements have been disrupted. Not by market forces, not by competition, but by internal decisions made without a full understanding of the systems they depended on." That landed harder. Marcus Ellington, standing near the back, stiffened. Sebastian saw it, connected it. "Too late, these systems," Evelyn continued, "are not isolated. They are layered, interdependent, and in many cases privately controlled." She let that sit, then added control, however, is often misunderstood. Sebastian's chest tightened. Because suddenly, this wasn't a speech. It was a correction. "For years," Evelyn said, "certain entities have benefited from access they didn't fully recognize. Capital flows, supply chains, strategic approvals that appeared independent." She glanced down briefly, as if recalling something precise. They weren't. A murmur moved through the room. Not loud, but real. Sebastian's mind raced. The Orion Microsystems deal. The delays, the inexplicable rejections, the missing approvals. He had blamed external volatility. Bad timing, competitors. But now, those weren't random. They were controlled. Evelyn's voice softened, but it didn't lose strength. Rothschild Dominion doesn't intervene publicly unless necessary. We prefer to let systems function as designed. Another pause. Then quietly, until they're misused. That word landed like a line drawn. Sebastian felt heat rise in his chest. "This is ridiculous," Charlotte whispered, but there was less conviction in her voice now. Sebastian stepped forward slightly, ignoring the eyes turning toward him again. "What exactly are you implying?" he called out. The room shifted. No one interrupted. No one told him to stop. Evelyn looked at him, fully this time. "For a long time," she said, "you believed Hale Dynamics was independent." Her words were careful, measured. But it wasn't. A beat. It operated within a framework. Sebastian's jaw tightened. "Every company does." "Yes," she said. "But not every company is built on infrastructure it doesn't control." Silence again. Denser now. Charlotte stepped forward beside him. "Are you saying you control his company?" she demanded. Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She turned slightly, addressing the room again. "Ownership isn't always visible," she said. "Sometimes it exists in approvals, in access, in the ability to move or halt entire systems with a single decision." Sebastian felt something crack, not externally, internally. Because he knew there had been moments. Deals that went through too smoothly, barriers that disappeared without explanation. Investors who aligned faster than they should have. He'd had taken it as skill, as instinct, as proof that he was building something powerful. Now it felt like something else entirely. Evelyn's gaze returned to him. "You never asked where that support came from," she said. "It wasn't an accusation, it was a fact. And when you stopped valuing it," she continued, "you didn't notice it was gone." The room reacted this time. Not loudly, but undeniably. Sebastian's breath shortened. "You're trying to take credit for my company," he said, his voice sharper now. "That's not how this works. We built Hale Dynamics from nothing." Evelyn didn't move. "You built what you could see," she said. The words were quiet, But they cut, and you ignored what you couldn't. Charlotte scoffed, but it sounded forced. This is just posturing. If she had that kind of control, why walk away? Or why sign the divorce with nothing? That question hung there. For a moment, even Sebastian wanted the answer. Evelyn held Charlotte's gaze this time. Because I didn't need anything from him, she said. No emotion, no bitterness, just truth. And because taking it through that agreement would have limited what I could do next. Charlotte frowned. Limited how? Evelyn didn't respond directly. Instead, she handed the microphone back to the host. I believe the next session is about strategic resilience, she said. You may find it more relevant than expected. The host nodded, balanced but recovered quickly. Of course, thank you, Miss Rothschild. Applause followed, not explosive, but sustained, respectful, earned. Evelyn stepped away from the stage, and as she did, people moved toward her. Not away. Investors, executives, names Sebastian had chased for years, all recalibrating, all shifting. Charlotte's hand slipped from his arm. Sebastian, she whispered, but there was no direction in it anymore. He didn't respond. He couldn't. Because across the room, Marcus was already pulling out his phone, and the look on his face wasn't confusion, it was recognition. Sebastian turned sharply. Marcus. Marcus hesitated, just for a second, then walked toward him. There's something you need to see, Marcus said quietly. Sebastian's stomach tightened. What is it? Marcus showed him the screen. A document, internal. Recently updated, filed within the last hour. Sebastian's eyes moved across the text, then stopped on a name. Rothschild Nexus Group, and beneath it a clause, a control clause. Activation triggered upon termination of personal affiliation with Evelyn Rothschild. Sebastian's breath caught. What is this? He said. Marcus didn't answer immediately. Because he didn't need to, Sebastian kept reading, and understood. Every contract tied to that structure, every dependency, every approval pipeline was no longer his. Transferred, legally, cleanly, completely. He looked up, across the room. Evelyn stood surrounded by people who now knew exactly who she was. And for the first time he realized he hadn't just lost her. He had triggered something irreversible, and whatever came next, he no longer had the power to stop it. The office felt smaller without the noise, not physically. The glass walls were still there. The skyline hadn't changed. The same polished surfaces reflected the same city that had once felt like his, but something fundamental was gone. Sebastian sat alone behind the desk that no longer carried the same weight. Hale Dynamics still existed on paper, but it was hollow now. Contracts dissolved, partnerships withdrawn. Systems that once responded instantly to his directives had gone quiet, as if they had never truly belonged to him. Because they hadn't. He leaned back slowly, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in fragments the early days. The belief that he had built something from nothing, the pride, the certainty, then the shift, the assumptions. The way he had started measuring worth in visibility and status, and who stood beside him in public, and how easily he had rewritten Evelyn into something smaller, a liability. The word echoed now, hollow and absurd. He exhaled, pressing his hand against his forehead. It hadn't been the money. That was the part he finally understood. The 10 million he offered her, the deals he lost, the company that collapsed around him. Those were consequences, yes. But they weren't the real loss. The real loss had been quieter. It was the trust she had given him when she chose to stay small beside him. The support he never questioned. The foundation he never bothered to understand. He had mistaken silence for insignificance. And when he no longer saw value in it, he let it go. No, he pushed it away. Sebastian sat forward, his elbows on the desk, hands clasped. There was no one left to argue with. No board to convince. No strategy to recover what was already gone, just the truth, and it didn't need to raise its voice. Across the city, Evelyn moved through a different kind of room. Not louder, not more extravagant, just aligned. The conversations around her were precise, intentional. People spoke to her with clarity, not because they feared her wealth, but because they understood her position. She wasn't performing power, she was exercising it. Edward Blackwood stood beside her briefly, reviewing a document before handing it over. She glanced through it, made a small note, and returned it without hesitation. A decision made, quietly, completely. Nothing about her suggested urgency, nothing suggested revenge, because there was none. What had been done to Sebastian wasn't retaliation, it was correction. The systems he had depended on had simply returned to their original structure, now that he was no longer part of it. Evelyn stepped away from the table, pausing near the window. For a moment she allowed herself to be still, not to dwell, not to regret, just to acknowledge. There had been a time when she believed what they had was enough. That simplicity could protect something real. That choosing to be seen as less would give her a chance to be loved without condition. She had been wrong, not about love, but about what it required to survive. Respect wasn't optional. And without it, everything else collapsed, no matter how much money surrounded it. She didn't feel anger anymore, just clarity. And that was enough. Back in his office, Sebastian reached for his phone, not to call her. He knew better now. There were no words that could rebuild what he'd dismissed so easily, no apology that could undo the way he had reduced her to something expendable. He lowered the phone again. For the first time, he didn't look for a solution. He just sat with it, the loss, not of wealth, but of something he hadn't recognized until it was already gone. Across the city, Evelyn walked forward without looking back, not because she had forgotten, but because she no longer needed to carry it. And in that quiet separation, the truth settled fully into place. He had lost everything he thought he owned, and everything he never realized he had. If you were in her place, would you have walked away the same way? Or would you have stayed and fought for what was already broken?